Well, it's been a day of tension in the Middle East after Tehran fired a series of ballistic missiles at two Iraqi air bases where U.S. troops are living. And it was Iran's most direct confrontation with the U.S. since the seizing of American hostages in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, and that was more than 4 decades ago. Today saw oil prices reach a 4-month high and airlines moving very quickly to keep their flights out of the area. So Middle East expert Dr. James Dorsey, now he joins us in studio, and he's a senior fellow at the Esrajaranam School of International Studies.
James, great to have you on with us. Now, Iran claims that the retaliations are over. Do we take this at face value? What's your thoughts?
The answer is yes and no. With other words, yes, because the Iranians clearly have, one, calibrated very carefully what their response would be to the killing of the Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, and they have offered the Americans a way out of an escalation of the crisis. What we don't know yet is whether the Americans accept the offer. With other words, how they will respond. First indications are that they may very well. It's no, because this buys time. It does not solve anything. So the rationale behind the Iranian actions of the last few weeks is basically that once they realized that the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese could not salvage truly the nuclear accord, and that there was no economic out, their only other option was to gradually escalate, bring it to the point of an all-out war that neither the Americans nor the Iranians want, in the hope that that would force everybody back to the negotiating table. So if you get now a lowering of the tensions, you still have that strategy.
And you mentioned that they've given the U.S. an out. What do you mean by that?
They've given the U.S. an out in the sense that, in strategic terms, I would describe the missile attack on the U.S. On the two U.S. Air bases in Iraq as brilliant. It occurred at the moment that millions of people were in the streets shouting for revenge. It served a domestic purpose. These were precision-guided missiles. They could have hit hard. They could have caused casualties, particularly American casualties. They didn't. They were calibrated not to cause casualties, because casualties would have given Trump no option. So, and then they've basically said, look, you don't respond, or what they haven't said, possibly you respond in a low-key fashion, then this is over. So, with other words, Trump has an option here.
So we are expecting or waiting to hear from him shortly. High-stakes decision looms for him. You know, this basically regarding what step he's going to take next.
Obviously, everybody agrees that Trump is unpredictable, and maybe that's what he wants to be. But there are two conflicting trends that I see in Trump. One is the belief that has so far proven to be false, that bluster, intimidation, harsh economic sanctions is going to force his opponents into line. It hasn't happened with North Korea. It hasn't happened with Iran. But there's a different picture. So if we look at the escalation of tensions by Iran over the last 9 months, what you immediately think of is the downing of a U.S. drone by the Iranians, the tanker attacks off the coast of the UAE, and the attacks on the Saudi oil facilities. That was the tip of the iceberg. The Americans have counted 90 attacks on U.S. targets in Iraq by Iranian-backed Iraqi militias in the last 8 months. Trump didn't respond. In a sense, he was practicing the same strategic patience that Iran was practicing earlier. So, you know, which side of the coin do you want to read?
So you're almost saying that Trump has actually shown restraint then over this period?
He showed restraint simply because he did not want to get, you know, look, he looks at the Middle East.
Yeah, he has long campaigned on pulling troops away from
he looks at it as an abyss. He wants to get out. He doesn't want to be sucked in. What I think, but this is, you know, my interpretation, but what I think persuaded him was those sitting in front of a television, looking at those images of a besieged U.S. embassy. And don't forget that what happened in Benghazi, Libya, with the killing of a U.S. diplomat at the time of the election campaign was a major issue to him.
So what do you see as the biggest sort of misconception that the U.S. has about Iran when it comes to how it's dealing with Iran? You mentioned that, you know, all the things it's been trying haven't been working. What does it need to be thinking about?
I think that there, and that goes not only for the United States, but for the West in general, including Europe, there is a total misunderstanding of the Iranians. I mean, this is not a nice regime, let's be clear about it. But if you look at this from an Iranian perspective, the last 40 years have been an Iraqi invasion funded by the Saudis and the Gulf states. A perception all along that the Americans and their allies want regime change. They signed an agreement on the nuclear agreement. They stuck to the letter of the agreement. And what they got was a U.S. withdrawal and harsh economic sanctions. So this is a country that's been on the defensive and perceives itself as having been threatened. And what they've done, you know, we talk about ballistic missiles, we talk about the proxies. Iran has a very weak military hand. It's one conventional military force are missiles. It has nothing else. It doesn't have an air force. Doesn't have a navy. It's got small, fast boats that can harass. It was facing a 40-year covert war with the Saudis. We talk about Saudi funding, $100 billion going into soft religious power. That was directed at the Iranians. The proxies was the answer.
Yeah, very complicated scenario indeed in the Middle East. Thank you for helping us understand it a little bit better today. Dr. James Dorsey, Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies.